Hey gang, it's me and Mr. Bones with another episode of Science Vids. This one's all about trees. And you might be saying, oh, trees, boring. Well, okay, yeah, maybe they are a little boring. Maybe there aren't cougars or elephants, but we've already done cougars and elephants. So it's time to take a step back and learn about these things that give us oxygen. If it wasn't for trees, we wouldn't have as much air to breathe and wood to build houses. Uh, and where are you going to put your tree house if there's no trees? So it's time to give a little appreciation for these magnificent plants. Okay, and here's just a little anatomy to start off with. Okay, here's a tree trunk all peeled open so we can see inside. So here in the middle, this is the heartwood. Now this is the first few years of the tree's life are that middle piece, and that middle piece is really important for the tree's structure and strength to be able to stand up straight and tall. And so it's basically dead in there, but it's really important structurally. And then moving outwards towards the bark, this is the sapwood, the xylem and the phloem. Uh, which are where all the minerals and nutrients and water go up and down in a tree. They're like the tree's elevators that bring all the stuff it needs to survive and grow up and down in the tree. And I got a cool photo here. Actually, let's go there right now. Here's these tubes uh, that the water and the nutrients travel up and down. This is looking down into a tree. This is like a cross section. It's basically like this, like if you were to find a stump and you had a really powerful microscope and you took a picture, this is what it would look like. And these are these tubes that the water and the nutrients and the food all travel up and down the tree to get to all the different parts of the plant. So beautiful, so cool looking. So yeah, that's the sapwood, the xylem and the phloem, it's called. And then as you work your way out towards the bark, you got the inner bark, um, which is this phloem. That's where all the minerals and kind of food travels throughout the tree. And then the outer bark, which is in some trees really thick. It could be like 3 or 4 inches thick, and can even withstand like a forest fire and keep the tree safe and alive during like a forest fire. So that's kind of the anatomy of the tree here. And here's a cross section. If you find a stump or something like that, this is what it looks like, where you got your heartwood in the middle, and then you're working your way out towards the bark. And of course, if we were to count these rings, 1 is the middle, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, about 10 years old. It's about Logan's age. That's how you count the age of a tree. Every year it grows another one of these rings. And but not all trees have growth rings. Isn't that fascinating? A lot of trees around the equator, around the middle of the earth, because there's not really seasons around the equator. They have maybe a rainy season and a dry season, but the temperature stays about the same, and a lot of times the weather's just kind of the same. They don't really have seasons like we do up here. Um, they don't have tree rings. A lot of trees don't have tree rings down there. So you find a stump, and you can't tell how old it is. Uh, at least not that way. Okay, and here's the picture of all these tubes, all that sapwood. Oh, I just think it's so pretty. So this would be the bark of the tree out here along the edge. Oops. Then as you move in, there's your phloem, where all kind of the food of the tree goes up, and here's the xylem, where all the water is traveling. Yeah, the xylem are these big tubes, big veins, basically. It's the vascular tissue of the plant, big veins of the tree. Are these big ones down here? And of course, we got maple syrup, and maple syrup is traveling in these big veins here, going up and down the tree. And this guy here is just like he's tapped all these trees, um, and now they're just pouring out into these buckets. And of course, he's got boil it down a little bit. It doesn't come out like the maple syrup you get in the store. He's got to boil off a lot of the water um, that's in that syrup when it comes out. But eventually, you boil it down enough, and it turns into the delicious maple syrup that we all love. And this is pretty cool. This is the Canadian flag, Canada's national flag, and it's got a maple leaf. This is a sugar maple leaf. It's Canada's national tree. Now we can break trees up basically into two different groups. There's a few different ways we can organize trees, but this is a big one here. We got evergreen trees where the leaves are generally really small, like needles. Needles are leaves, um, and they stay on the tree year round. They don't fall off in the winter, like a deciduous tree. Deciduous trees, their leaves fall off when it gets cold in the fall. The leaves turn colors when it gets cold, and then eventually they fall off, and they look basically dead all winter long until spring starts coming around. It starts to get warmer. You see the little buds pop out, and the leaves unfurl in spring and summer, and they get all bushy, and you can't even see through a tree like this because it's all full of leaves. Then of course it gets cold again. Leaves start turning color, and then they fall off again. So we got both types of trees around here. Our evergreen trees are like the Douglas fir and all the cedars and spruce and stuff like that. And deciduous would be like maple trees. A lot of oak trees are deciduous. Some oak trees are evergreen, so that's maybe not a good example. Alders, stuff like that. They lose their leaves in the wintertime. Okay, what does a tree eat? Whoa, big scary picture. This is from this movie Little Shop of Horrors about a meat eating plant. Well, there are plants that eat meat actually. Maybe that'll be another science vid. But most trees don't eat meat. They eat sunlight through a process called photosynthesis. So, how do they do this? I mean, this is really cool. I'd love to get into this someday. But basically, green plants take in sunlight, they take in carbon dioxide, CO2 from the air surrounding them, and it's what we breathe out. Breathe out right now. What you're mostly breathing out is carbon dioxide, okay? And trees and plants need that carbon dioxide. And so they take up that carbon dioxide, that CO2, through their leaves. The leaves have these little teeny holes in them that uptake carbon dioxide. And they combine that with the sunlight, and they basically make food for themselves. They make carbohydrates that they eat. And as a byproduct, as like a waste product, they breathe out oxygen, which of course is what we need to breathe and to live. So it's this really cool relationship where trees and plants need carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out, and then they put out oxygen as a byproduct, as a waste product, and that's what we need to live. So we have this very special relationship with plants that way. And here's another cartoon kind of showing it. So yeah, inside each and every leaf are these things called chloroplast. They're these little teeny machines. They're very cool. It'd be neat to get into it someday. But basically, they're these little teeny batteries, like solar panels, where they store the energy that they're getting from the sun, and each leaf just has thousands of these little teeny batteries that are storing light energy from the sun. Carbon dioxide comes up through the stomata. That's these little teeny holes in the leaves. That's this little thing here. The leaf's taking up this carbon dioxide. It's storing all this sunlight energy. It's using water that either comes down through the leaf, or it's pulling up the water from the ground, and it's getting out to the leaf. And basically, it makes carbohydrates using these three ingredients. And it's kind of like magic. I mean, it really is just an amazing process. And it's actually eating the sunlight and making food for itself and giving us oxygen in the process. Thanks, trees. Okay, now how do these massive straight trees stand up so straight? It's because they have these great big root systems. And look at this thing. Some trees, they have just as much root mass as they do above ground mass. So if you look at a tree's, the leaves and branches and the whole, top part of the tree, imagine all of that same amount of mass, same amount of material that you see above the ground is below the ground. And it's helping attach the tree to the earth. It's helping stabilize it, anchoring it so it can go nice and straight up. And here's a big old uh, sequoia tree root wad. They call this a root wad when a tree flips over, and you can see the whole bottom side of the root structure. That's called a root wad. And there's some really cool ones if you go hiking in the woods around here, especially if you go out in the rainforest out by forks and stuff. It's like these massive root wads that are like 30 feet tall and have hundreds of different plants growing on them if they've been there for a while. Okay, now this is a really great little video. At one point, they're talking about fungi, and those are fungi is a scientific name for mushrooms. And in this video, they're not necessarily talking about the mushrooms that are popping out above the ground that we see like out in the field and stuff during recess, but there's mushrooms basically growing in the ground around the roots, on the roots, and so that's what they're talking about when they say fungi.
Trees may look like solitary individuals, but the ground beneath our feet tells a different story. Trees are secretly talking, trading, and waging war on one another. They do this using a network of fungi that grow around and inside their roots. The fungi provide the trees with nutrients, and in return they receive sugars. But scientists have found this connection runs far deeper than first thought. By plugging into the fungal network, trees can share resources with each other. The system has been nicknamed the Wood Wide Web. It's thought that older trees, fondly known as mother trees, use this fungal network to supply shaded seedlings with sugars, giving them a better chance of survival. Those trees that are sick or dying may dump their resources into the network, which might then be used by healthier neighbours. Plants also use fungi to send messages to one another. If they're attacked, they can release chemical signals through their roots, which can warn their neighbours to raise their defences. But like our internet, the Wood Wide Web has its dark side too. Some orchids hack the system to steal resources from nearby trees, and other species, like the black walnut, spread toxic chemicals through the network to sabotage their rivals. Arboreal cybercrime aside, scientists are still debating why plants seem to behave in such an altruistic way. The hidden network creates a thriving community between individuals. When you're next in woodland, you might like to think of trees as part of a big superorganism, chatting and swapping information and food under your feet.
I love that idea. I love the idea of, this forest right here that we're looking at as being a big interconnected superorganism, and they're talking to each other. And the mother trees are like sending out nutrients to help out their little seedlings that are growing underneath them in the shade. It's a really cool concept, and it's pretty funny that they call it the Wood Wide Web, like the internet is known as the World Wide Web. I thought that was a pretty funny joke, but yeah, I thought that was a really cool video. So we've been talking about the ground and the fungi, the mushrooms that help these trees talk to each other and spread nutrients and work as a team. So now we're going to move up from the ground all the way up to the canopy, to the tops of the trees. And look at these folks here. This has got to be the coolest job in the world. They're climbing this giant sequoia tree, the biggest organism on Earth. And they're just hanging out there studying what's living up there, how big this tree is, how much it grows every year. I mean, this has to be the coolest job ever. They're up like 200 feet up in the air, hanging off these massive branches on ropes and stuff. Okay, so yeah, biggest organism on Earth. And the reason I have a little asterisk, that's what this thing is called. Whoops, next to organism. It's the biggest single thing on Earth. It's kind of a complicated question because there's some like animals that clone themselves, and taken all together, they're actually much bigger than this tree. But the biggest single thing on the planet is a sequoia tree, is this species of tree. It weighs 2.7 million pounds. I mean, that's mind boggling. How do you even think about that? But we have a sequoia growing right across the street at Jefferson, right across from Mrs. Bear's office. You look right across the street, that's a sequoia tree. It's not very big. It's only 60 or 70 feet tall. But if you were to come back in 100 years or something, that tree would be enormous. And so that's the biggest single organism in the planet. And then they're related to redwoods, which are the tallest trees on Earth. And that's where we're going to go right now. We're going to go to the very top of the redwood forest canopy and to see what's going on out there. And it's this whole world that they just recently discovered is going on up there. And they started climbing these trees and spending some time up there, and they found all these critters that never even leave the canopy. Salamanders and little teeny rodents that never really come down from the tops of the trees. They live out their entire lives up there. And of course, there's birds that nest up there, and there's all these plants that are growing up here. Here's a huckleberry that's growing way up there, and ferns. Yeah, here's a little salamander. There's all kinds of stuff happening out there. And there's like this big layer of soil. Like here's the branch, wood down here, and here's like a foot of soil growing on top of this branch here. And there's even a little tree growing out of the branch on here. So there's trees growing on top of other trees. And here's another, redwood growing out of just this enormous branch. So there's a couple salamanders that sometimes never leave the tops of these trees. Their parents lay their eggs up there, the babies develop, and they just live up in these real lush canopy places. This is the clouded salamander and the wandering salamander. And this is down in, California and Oregon is where these redwoods are. And we have them up here, but just like these big groves down there is where these critters live. And of course, the red-backed tree vole is one of these little rodents that's in some cases never really come down out of the canopy. And the flying squirrel, he's all stretched out and he's gliding between trees right here. And these flying squirrels do come down to the ground sometimes, and they dig these little mushrooms. Believe it or not, this is a truffle mushroom, and they smell them growing in the ground. They're attached to roots of trees. Actually, they dig them up and they pull them out, and that's one of their favorite foods. So flying squirrels do come down to the ground to get these mushrooms, but they spend a lot of time in the tops of the trees. And of course, you got predators eating these little furry critters. This cute little thing is a weasel, actually a super vicious predator besides looking like a nice little fluffy animal. And then here's a spotted owl, these nighttime predators. And the flying squirrels was one of the spotted owl's favorite meals. And then there's this crazy seabird called a marbled murrelet. Now this bird, dives for fish out in the ocean, way out in the ocean. There's a little fish in its mouth. Whoops. And but it flies back inland off the sea, sometimes 50 miles into the mountains, to nest on a branch in one of these giant, either a redwood tree or a Doug fir. We have them around here. They nest in Doug firs, but it needs a really big branch, like wide enough so that it can comfortably sit on the branch and make a nest and lay its egg. And here's all this bird poop surrounding the nest there. But a seabird that nests in the canopy of the forest. Pretty cool. And all these plants growing on all these trees up in the canopy are called epiphytes. Fancy word, just means a plant growing on another plant, basically. And it's not hurting the plant necessarily. It's just doing its thing. It's just using the plant as something it's using the tree as something to grow on. And these epiphytes have their own little ecosystem in a lot of cases. Like down in the tropics, all these cool things are called bromeliads. And there's these species of frogs that lay their eggs out here. This is a bunch of frog eggs right here that are laid on the end of this leaf. And once they hatch out, this frog puts the little tadpoles on its back and carries it down into the middle of this plant here, where there's a little pool of water a lot of times, and that's where it puts the tadpoles. And the tadpoles develop and turn into baby frogs in that little teeny pool. And these frogs never really leave the tops of these trees. Super cool little system up there. And then, of course, all trees must die and they fall down, but then they provide life for the next generation. And so here's these little teeny little seedlings growing out of this log here. This is an old log that fell, and you can see little teeny trees are growing up out of them. And then they get a little bit bigger, growing up. And then after a while, in this picture down here, see these 3 trees all in a row, and they're kind of growing up on stilts like that. Those are old. This is an old tree that fell straight like that, and these are the little babies that grew up straight right out of it. And so the nurse log, the old tree that died long ago, has completely disappeared. And so if you see a real straight line of trees out in the woods, maybe that's what happened. Check to see if they've kind of been growing up on stilts like that, and the roots might be a little elevated like that. It's probably a nurse log that these trees got their start on. And those are called colonnades when they're all in a line like that. Okay, gang, I had to split this science vid up into a couple different episodes, and so that's the first episode because we're kind of rambling and going a little long. But stay tuned for part 2 coming later this week. And thanks for watching, wolves. Oh, Mr. Bones says bye-bye.